So I wanted to talk to you about relegation markets, and before I go into this video I wanted to make it clear I've taken a position on this already, just so that you're aware. But relegation markets are markets that interest me a lot, simply because they can be quite tradable. So you know the scenario: a team gets into trouble, sinks towards the bottom of the league, everybody panics, manager gets sacked, they sign a few new players, and then they start heading back up again. Well, that's the theory anyway. So they present an opportunity each year, and that's where the opportunity comes from. There's a little bit of downside in that this is a market that can only be settled when the outcome is known, same as any other market. But of course, typically that's only in May, later in the year, towards the end of the season, when that particular scenario, whether a team's been relegated or not, is well known. So if you're going to commit to this market, it has to be over a very long period of time. But they are very tradable. And that's simply because teams will do anything to stay in their current league. It's more predominant in the top tiers of football across Europe and wherever. But basically relegation is an expensive business, so teams will do what they can to avoid it. There are some teams, however, that just can't avoid it. So if you've never played in the top tier before, it involves an incredible amount of money to play at that top tier. Typically in the form of player wages. So if you get promoted to a top tier, such as the Premier League, then you need to get in brand new players or pay a lot more for players to have any chance of competing there. If you don't do that, you're going to get relegated straight away. So that's important to know. Basically, if a team comes up and doesn't have the backing, then it's quite likely that they will go down. That's just one of the harsh realities of modern football. The problem being that when you get promoted, do you take a risk, spend enormous amounts of money in an attempt to stay up, only to find that you don't, and then that money evaporates, and suddenly, your club could go bankrupt. I'm sure you're all familiar with examples of that. So, there are teams that really stand no chance of avoiding relegation. And typically what I tend to do is I tend to bet on teams avoiding relegation. In other words, I'll lay a team that looks like it will be relegated. But typically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find signs that the team is going to turn around and start moving out of that relegation zone. And as I've said on the blog and in other videos, when you spend a lot of money on players, that does tend to produce better results. So if a team is in the relegation zone but makes some good signings in January, then that very often can have a beneficial effect and can help pull the team away. But also, if a team sacks the manager, that can have a beneficial effect and pull the team away from relegation. I'm sure you'll know of examples where they've appointed a new manager and it's made no difference, and sometimes, clubs are beyond hope. So I've spent many, many years studying each individual manager appointment and sacking to see what effect it had and how that played out, and what impact that was likely to have. Now, I've seen various academic studies. A lot of them focus on the psychological effects of a new manager and show that that does have a positive effect. But I've also seen some that say that there is no effect through sacking a manager. But the problem that you have is whenever you read any academic study, they tend to rely upon stats too much and don't look into the depth of it. So, if a team gains 10 places because they appointed a new manager and he did something interesting, they're comparing that with a manager that was appointed who lost 10 places in the league and was relegated because he did absolutely nothing or was unable to for one reason or another. But the fact is there are plenty of clues out there that tell you if a team is going to turn around. So I don't know if you remember, Tony Pulis was appointed to Crystal Palace when Crystal Palace looked almost certain for relegation a couple of years ago. And he turned it around in spectacular style. And, I actually have a fair bit of respect for him. I think he's a good manager, and I've followed his career for a period of time, watched what he does and how he does it, and it does have a positive effect. So he's now just been appointed to West Brom, and he's come in and said, look, forget my reputation, difficult job, blah, 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 blah. That's exactly what I'd expect him to say, because he's just, laying out the ground and making sure that expectations are low so that he can exceed them. And I fully expect that he will turn around the situation at West Brom, because I gave you that example of teams that just don't have the money and can't stay up in the division. But there are a lot of teams that are generally underperforming who do have the money and resources and the crowd attendance and all of those things and the players. And West Brom is one of those teams. So, then they're not going to be in the top 4 by the end of the season, but you would expect them to probably be around mid-table or so on, and they have been a net underperformer. So by appointing a new manager, and a good one, we would expect their form to rebound at some point. So I think they traded, I'll bring up the graph on this video, I don't have the numbers to hand, but I think they traded as around 3-ish or somewhere around there. It may have been lower. And I was watching them as the odds got stronger and stronger for them to get relegated. And then when Pulis was appointed, I started laying them. So that's my position in the market on that particular team. And as they escape and start moving up table and start to string together some good results, they had a cracker of a result in the FA Cup that will give their confidence a massive boost. Then I'll start to trade out of that position. But I'll also be watching all the other clubs in and around that relegation melee at the bottom of the division. And there may become other teams that fall into that characteristic, and then I will trade them. And I will just keep on trading like that through the whole of the season, trading in and trading out. And then come May, I should get a really nice bonus. And, there is an effect there. If you look at the football markets, you understand how managers affect teams, you understand how the teams are playing and whether they're above or below strength, and whether they have the financing and the players to be able to do it, then this is actually quite a good strategy to do. Like I said, the only downside is that you won't get settled until much later in the season, so you're going to have to trade and commit money to the market for long periods of time. But it generally works pretty well. Promotion is a different game altogether, so I'm not going to cover that on this video. But actively trading the relegation markets is a good place. And like I said, I've got involved on West Brom. Anything could happen from here, you just don't know. You may fall out with the chairman and then it all falls apart and whatever and so on. So if you're going to take an active position in it, make sure that you manage it and that you just don't use blind faith in terms of how you're going to manage that trade. But that's the position I've taken in anticipation of them producing better results under the new manager. I think it will happen to other teams as well as the season goes on. And we're going to have several teams that are going to fall into that trap at some point and probably escape. It happens every year, has done for many seasons. And regardless of what academic studies are out there, I have the best proof in that I've been doing it for quite a few years. And you can pick teams that are going to benefit from a new manager being appointed or signing new players or both. So I recommend you give that particular market a crack. It's an interesting one. It will keep your interest at the bottom of the table even if your team isn't there. And give it a try.
If you're interested in learning more about BetAngel, its tools and the opportunities they present, why not visit betangel.com today to download a free trial.